This is Views. This program is intended to engage you along with pastors, scholars, speakers, and Bible-believing scientists by giving them an opportunity to share with you, the viewer, their views according to their precious time and prayerful research and study of the Bibles. Often that's many, many years of research and study. But they do that to help us broaden our understanding, to challenge our limitations, and to inspire our spirits for deeper understanding of the Word of our infinite God, Jesus. Well, it's a privilege to be with Dr. Tonstad, who's an author of a book called Gods of Sense and Traditions of Nonsense, as you see on the screen. This is part 3 of 3 episodes discussing his book, a book that I strongly recommend that you go out and get, because you're not going to be able to understand what he knows until you read his book, and he will give you a sneak preview of his years of study. Thank you, Dr. Tonstad, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I've learned so much. It's been very joyful to be with you.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad to see you focusing on the issues that you are here in your book. Those of you who missed the first 2, you want to go to our website and check out the repeat times. Also, it will be available video on demand on the web, in addition to broadcasting on satellite and all your other receiving devices at home. So for those who are joining us for part 3 and have not been part of 1 or 2, give us a quick summary of your book.
So my book is a post-Holocaust cosmic conflict perspective on the reality of evil. So that's a big mouth there. I'm writing it with a perspective on our time, Holocaust, the problems of what God has in some ways permitted. I am saying that there isn't just God, there isn't just human beings, there is a demonic reality that isn't God, isn't human. So I'm putting all this in a cosmic perspective, and I am using all the biblical resources. I'm bringing the best biblical resources I know of to bear on these difficult questions.
Right, right. One of your chapters discussed the Grand Inquisitor and the sense of Jesus. This may be unfamiliar to some of our viewers, including me. Perhaps you can explain it.
Yeah. So one of the most influential books ever written that deals with the problem of suffering is the book by the Russian author Dostoevsky, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who died in 1881. He wrote a book called The Brothers Karamazov, and by anybody's criterion, this book is one of the, as I said, one of the most influential books ever written. So there are 4 brothers Karamazov. The 2 brothers that I feature the most in my 2 chapters, where I interact with Dostoevsky, is Ivan and Alyosha. Ivan is an analytical, modern, materialist, philosophically oriented person. And Alyosha is a believer who plans to dedicate his life to what you might call a religious vocation. So Ivan, one day, he gets on one-on-one with Alyosha, and he tears into him. He says, "Don't you understand the suffering of children? You know, that there is no coherence here. You know, how can you accept a God who allows the suffering of children?" And then he gives us very specific examples of the suffering of children. And then he says, well, the Christian says, well, there will be harmony, there is forgiveness, there is, everything. And he debunks everything that Christians usually say about the problem of suffering. And toward the end, I think I have something here I can illustrate it. Toward the end of his discussion with Alyosha, he says, I cannot accept this. It isn't that I don't believe in God. I simply return to him the ticket. So he, God offers him salvation, but he says, no, thank you, because the suffering of children is such a big big stumbling block for him. But then, as you know, that discussion has kind of sort of run its course, and they have talked themselves empty, or Ivan has talked himself empty. And then he says to Alyosha, you know what? I have written a poem, Alyosha, Ivan is very analytical. He's like arithmetic, very logical. So a person like Ivan shouldn't be writing poems. So you get the feeling that here is a softer side to this person who wants to return the ticket. And then, what is the poem then? Well, the poem is called The Grand Inquisitor. And Ivan, he says to Alyosha, look here, we are in the city of Seville in Spain, Sevilla. And it's the 15th century, it's the time of the Inquisition, when flames, people are burned to the glory of God every day. And one day, Jesus suddenly appears. He comes back to earth. It's the same Jesus. Suddenly he comes back there and walks the streets of Seville. And he heals the sick and he blesses people. It's just like the good old days. Except that now the Grand Inquisitor sees Jesus there. And the people are impressed by Jesus, but when the Grand Inquisitor crosses the city square, they have a lot of reverence for that man. He orders Jesus arrested. He says, take him, seize him, and the people, the prison, the wardens, they take Jesus and put him in jail. And in the evening, the Grand Inquisitor comes to jail to talk to Jesus. And that's what the poem is all about. So what else do you want to know about it? So the Grand Inquisitor tells Jesus that there was something wrong with God's value system, that Jesus made a big mistake. I'd love to tell you what he tells, that mistake is.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I will. So he starts out by saying, why did you come to interfere with us? Why don't you leave us alone? We have worked so hard. He's talking about the church. The Grand Inquisitor is the person who ensures that people will believe the right things. Right. So we've worked so hard at this, and now you come and you interfere with us and you just mess it up. But we are not going to let you interfere with us. We're going to stick to our project. And then he says to Jesus, you really like freedom. Freedom is a big mistake. If you really loved people, you would not have given them so much freedom. Don't you see that all the evil in the world, all the bad things in the world is the consequence of freedom? So we need to curtail freedom. So the Grand Inquisitor says, as a person of the church, he says, we corrected your deed. We curtailed freedom. You, Jesus, you overestimated humans. Humans are not suitable material for freedom. So, I will have to refer people either to Dostoevsky or to my book, but let me just conclude that part by saying that, there is some ambiguity there, but in some ways, Ivan praises God and Jesus for being committed to freedom, that our commitment to God, our love for God, has to be given freely. But in some ways, he doesn't really believe in freedom, so he will, say to Jesus that lack of freedom is proof of love more than freedom is. So in some ways, he puts love and freedom in conflict with each other. It's a very important discussion. It is very important to have that discussion in our time, because there is, in some ways, even in the public square, even in the conduct of national affairs, national security, freedom. There is a sort of secular corollary to it. Well, religions have not liked freedom. Christianity didn't like freedom. The history of the Christian church. And so the question is, does God like freedom? And yes, and
God gave the
freedom. Jesus of the Gospels, the sense of the Grand Inquisitor is that freedom was a mistake. The sense of Jesus is that freedom wasn't a mistake, and he's ready to defend it.
Exactly. Oh, that's beautiful. And that's here in your book?
That is in the
that's
book.
Kind of an added note. It is here.
It is there.
Wonderful.
Oh, yes.
Then you have a chapter featuring such diverse individuals such as Roger Williams, Augustine, Mark Twain, Eddie. I mean, how did that get there? And what were you trying to
because
such a diversity
the title of my book, God of Sense and Traditions of Nonsense, actually assumes that common sense has a role in religion. Well, we need to go to the Bible. We need to go to the Bible. There's nothing to be said for common sense. I am all for going to the Bible, but I'm also for the notion that there is room for common sense. And in that chapter that I called Common Sense and Sense Uncommon, I refer to some key individuals who argue certain things on the basis of what you might call common sense. Roger Williams, he was the founder of Rhode Island. He was one of the most important immigrants to come to this country ever. He came here in 1630, 1631. He believed that a country should be a friendly place for people, whatever your faith, whatever your religion. If you're Presbyterian, fine. Baptist, fine. Muslim, fine. Hindu, Buddhist, fine. Atheist, you can still be a citizen and belong to the Commonwealth. You don't have to be a certain kind of faith. So he has a vision of the nation where religion and citizenship are not, the same. That was a very risky idea. So Roger Williams was persecuted for that, and the New England Pilgrims would have killed him if they had gotten their hands on him. So Roger Williams argues that there is a connection between Christianity and civility, that he argues beautifully. So that's one of the voices I have. Who were the others? I have Mark Twain.
That's right.
Mark Twain. So in the book Huckleberry Finn, I'd say that Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer probably are the most important, most representative books written for the New World, written in America. This is New World. And in some ways, the nice thing about America is that you can challenge tradition. You don't have to think the way they thought before.
Right.
There is a certain openness to new things. Well, Mark Twain takes full advantage of that in the book Huckleberry Finn. Huck Finn has run away from home. He is out there, on his own as a young child, almost like a child. And he has helped an African-American slave, Jim. He has helped him run away. He has helped him escape. But after he did that, he got a bad conscience. Oh, maybe he shouldn't have done that. Maybe he'll go to hell, for helping Jim, escape slavery. So he sits down and he writes, a letter to the slave owner. Your slave, Jim, is down here, I'm ready to return him. And after he has written that letter, his conscience is much lighter. Oh, now he feels better. Now I can pray again,
Right.
But he doesn't get around to praying right away. He's thinking, well, returning Jim to slavery. Jim is so happy, now he's a free man, And, but if I don't return him, maybe I'll go to hell. So he sits there with the letter he has written and then wonders, what should he do? And then he tears the letter into two pieces and throws it away and says, let me just go to hell. But do you hear what is going on here?
Yeah,
Do you hear?
That's interesting.
Do you hear that this is common sense? Common sense compassion.
Right.
Rising up against a Christian tradition of cruelty, hell and all of it, and duty, that you have a duty to keep, Jim in slavery. So he wants to help Jim in the name of compassion, even if he has to go to hell for it. Of course,
it's more of becoming self-denying, denying himself for the sake of someone else.
Exactly. And I think Mark Twain meant to say, well, let hell go to hell. That is basically,
isn't that lack of sense, as we talked about in the first chapter of the first program? The cause of the Holocaust was the lack of using that common sense by many who followed the system.
Very, very much. Yes, exactly. And what is what needs to be emphasized here is that not all theology is merited. Sometimes secular voices, sometimes common sense secular voices actually, might talk to us and say, well, you know what, don't you want to rethink that? Don't you really think that sort of belief ought to be changed,
Is common sense a side product of the power of the Holy Spirit? Talking through your mind, through what God gave us? I mean, I like to think God gave us that intelligence to exercise good common sense and logic versus no logic.
I think that would be a good way of saying it, that God doesn't only speak to us through Scripture. He can also inspire us like he inspires Huck Finn to be merciful to Jim, and tear up the
paper.
the letter and in some ways figuratively say, I'm willing to go to hell, but I'll go there in the name of compassion.
That's really fascinating, which really raises a very ethical point with all of us to apply common sense in all settings, in all situations. Stand for the truth, do the right thing.
But, and practice civility. Roger
Right.
Williams says there is no competition between Christianity and civility. And you and I are having this conversation at a time when civility is going up in smoke, So here you have these voices, Christian voices, wonderful voices telling us, Christianity is good at civility.
Isn't it convenient for some to interpret Scripture or Christianity for their own purpose, to suit their needs rather than what God is saying? We often read things different from what is intended to tell us.
Well, I'll say, one has to be respectful, even, toward people with whom you disagree intensely. Yes, I disagree intensely with some elements in the theological tradition. One person in the theological tradition who started it, something that I disagree with is Augustine. The most influential Christian thinker, probably, outside the Bible. But my disagreement with Augustine doesn't mean lack of respect for him.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I think, this is, we should, disregard him. I would still, treat his legacy with respect. I have a person in there that very few people have heard of, Etty Hillesum.
Yeah, I saw that name and wasn't sure even how to pronounce it.
Yeah, so most people have heard of Anne Frank.
Right.
Anne Frank, the diary of Anne Frank, hugely influential person who went into hiding in Amsterdam during the time of the Holocaust. And she, Anne Frank was discovered and she was, executed cruelly, everything, terrible things. And the diary of Anne Frank has been very influential. In the same city, there was another person, Etty Hillesum. And Etty Hillesum was older than Anne Frank. She's an adult. She also died at Auschwitz. She died in the fall of 1943. She also wrote diaries. And the diaries of Ethylism has just recently come to light. She is the person that is represented by what I call uncommon sense. She starts praying. She kneels by her bed. She says, I'm a kneeler in training. It's new to her. She used to be a secular person. I'm a kneeler in training. I stay on my knees. I need to gather strength. And praying, she says, is like an intimate relation. It's as intimate as being with another person, you know, in an intimate situation. It is even more intimate than that, she says. And then she says, God, you need to help. You can't help us. We need to help you. She offers herself as a, solution. And she says to God, God, it isn't your fault. It isn't, like you did it to us. It is really our fault. And then I think the most beautiful side of her prayer is where she says, God, you must help us preserve a little bit of yourself, that we don't lose the God part in us, in some ways, because she sees the world taken captive by godlessness.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. It almost leaves me speechless here. But on my torn piece of paper that he tore,
I'm sorry.
I still have my notes.
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
but that's what meant to
Illustrate, and it did very well.
Huck Finn tearing up his lettering.
No, that's fantastically fine. In the last two chapters, you deal with the book of Revelation, something I'm really, really passionate about. I have understood that you're currently writing also commentary on Revelation. Tell us a little bit. We don't have a whole lot of time left, and I have one more question for you.
Yeah, so yes, I am currently writing a commentary on Revelation, which will be, a full commentary. I have two chapters. The two last chapters in God of Sense are from Revelation, because in some ways, Revelation drives home the idea. Let's say that Revelation begins with lack of understanding of God. There is a crisis in the heavenly council. Who can open the book and break the seals?
Right.
Nobody knows how to do that. Jesus does it, and in the end, there is understanding. There is, in some ways, a move within the book of Revelation from seeing a God who doesn't make sense to a God who does make sense once God's revelation has made it, has communicated or has emptied itself. So in some ways, the book of Revelation is in some ways paradigmatic. It kind of tells the story of moving from not understanding into understanding.
I want to go back to demonic powers. In Revelation, there's going to be a lot of activities, at least in the last days, what I meant. Engage us a little bit about that. You see Satan playing, obviously, a stronger role in the last days.
Yes, and you see evil in Revelation as an imitative phenomenon. It's not like evil comes to you as evil.
Right.
Evil comes
disguise,
to you
basically.
as good. Yes, it comes to you as there is this lamb in Revelation 13, the beast in Revelation 13 that looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a serpent, and it uses power and so on, so one needs to think in what plays itself out in Revelation is evil, but in an imitative expression. It imitates. It tries to pretend that it is good, and so there is identity theft, someone
well said,
someone posing as Jesus who isn't that, and so maybe we need to think about this in sort of broadly, more ideological terms, and say there is a lot of religion in the world, there's a lot of Christianity in the world, there is a lot of Jesus in the world. Now, is it is the Jesus that we hear about, everyone talks about, and yes, they want to, make the world, more Christian. Are those movements, those sentiments, are they truly reflecting, the true Jesus, who is a victim of violence, who doesn't slash and burn, and who brings to us the truth about God in maybe soft currency in some ways.
So you're seeing basically seeing that there's going to be beyond just the deception of Jesus, but also the wrong movement as well, that's deceptively stealing people to worship the wrong God.
Well, if you want to put it in just sort of
More so.
Yes, simple terms, you could say, I suppose, that the book of Revelation pictures a climax in history that is a competition between Jesus and Jesus.
Right.
No, not Jesus.
The false Jesus.
Jesus and Jesus. Yes, the false Jesus. Because that is the aspiration of the other side. And so I don't do an event-centered reading of Revelation as much as many people might like to do. I do a values-centered reading more. We need to know what sort of values the real Jesus stands for.
You're working on that book,
I am.
and when do you suspect publication goes in place?
Oh, I am reluctant. I have a deadline. I'm under contract, and my deadline is later this year. I hope I can meet the deadline. It's going to be very hard. It's a lot of work, but by the grace of God, maybe I'll be able to meet my deadline this year.
Well, hopefully, and we pray for you to meet the deadline, but when the book is published, we can get you back here to talk about it.
I'll be very happy to come back and talk to you. It's a real privilege to be here. Thank you.
Likewise. How many books have you published so far?
Oh, in English, I have worked on more, significant projects. So I have my Sabbath book, I have the God of Sense book, I have a commentary out on the book of Romans, just published now. The letter to the Romans, Paul among the ecologists.
And then the book of Revelation.
And then I'm working on Revelation now. So.
Congratulations on such spirit of commitment to present God in His positive light. We thank you for what you're doing here with us at LLBN. We like to thank you what you're doing with Loma Linda University. A great place for many to go study, great place for many to work. We thank God for Loma Linda, and we thank Loma Linda for sharing you with us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Appreciate your time to do 3 episodes. Folks, 3 episodes. This was the last part of 3. Please check our websites for air and times as well. If you'd like to see them all online, you can just visit www.llbn.tv and learn, or once again, revisit these programs and learn more from Dr. Tonstad. Thank you, sir. And thank you, folks. Keep us in your prayers and keep him in your prayers. And hope to see you again on a different episode here on Views.